If you're watching this, you probably don't understand Blacktober. And I know this because, frankly, most people don't understand Blacktober, be they professional artists or just casual observers. In the year that Blacktober's existed, it's gotten a reputation for being obnoxious, unnecessary, and to some, even racist, with many going as far as to say that the mere existence of Blacktober is offensive in and of itself. And with the second iteration of Blacktober happening again this year, I found that this reputation hasn't decreased or cooled off, because in many ways, it's only deepened. But I'm here to argue a different viewpoint. The viewpoint that Blacktober is fine, actually. Not only do I think it's fine, but in some ways, I believe that it's kind of necessary. Because of the harassment that Blacktober artists usually get, I won't be featuring anyone else's Blacktober artwork other than my own in this video. I wanted to because their art is gorgeous, but it's just not worth the risk of sending harassment anyone else's way. But if you're a good person who doesn't like harassing or doxing people on the internet, then I'd encourage you to give this video a chance and to open yourself up to a different and nuanced perspective. Blacktober first began 1 year ago in October of 2020, directly following the Summer of Black Lives Matter protests for the murder of George Floyd. It first emerged primarily as a replacement for Inktober. If you don't know, Inktober was an annual art challenge created by Jake Parker in 2009. This challenge was basically the most popular time of year for the artist during the entire decade of the 2010s, but last year, several controversies surrounding Jake Parker wound up bringing the end of Inktober's reign, and in 2020, many people were outright condemning it. One of these controversies was a plagiarism scandal between Jake Parker himself and a black pen and ink artist named Alfonso Dunn. In 2020, Dunn accused Parker of plagiarism, asserting that Parker's book, the Inktober Handbook, heavily stole from his own 2015 book titled Pen and Ink Drawing. Now, I'm not here to argue whether or not Dunn's accusations are valid, because I don't want to turn this into a call-out video, but I do need to describe these events because they lay an important foundation for us to understand before we continue on. 2020 saw Black people face trauma after trauma, from witnessing police brutality, to being attacked in protests, to simply enduring the weight and danger of the COVID-19 pandemic. By the end of the year, Black people were drained and exhausted, and were searching for any outlet we could find to relieve our stress. And after the Alfonso Dunn scandal, yet another instance of a Black man reporting to have been exploited and taken advantage of, Black artists in particular were longing for something fun and exciting to take our mind off of the brutal year that we just endured. Enter Blacktober. Blacktober is an art challenge where Black artists take their favorite non-Black characters and make them, well, Black. Artists can choose characters from anime, Western cartoons, video games, sometimes even book characters. But what began as a fun challenge designed to alleviate our stress quickly became one of the biggest sources of fear and anxiety for the entire online Black artist community. Before long, the rest of the internet had caught wind of Blacktober and began doxing Black artists and sending them racist memes and death threats. But even among people who didn't directly participate in the harassment, there was still a lot of cynicism and negative pushback towards the mere concept of Blacktober. Blacktober hate spans across all corners of the internet, whether on Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, or YouTube. But no matter which corner of the internet you might find yourself in, there are always several recognizable protests against Blacktober that crop up time and time again. These protests can pretty much be broken up into 5 different arguments. Number 1. Blacktober is racist against Japanese people because making the Asian character Black is racist. Number 2. Blacktober is racist because blackwashing is just as bad as whitewashing. Number 3. Black people already have Black characters, so we should just draw them instead. Number 4. Black people should make their own stories and art instead of stealing from other people's. And number 5. Race-bending characters is shallow representation. We're going to tackle each of these arguments one by one, starting with number 1, Blacktober being racist against Japanese people. So, I've thought long and hard about how I was going to approach this topic, and I've been very nervous about it because I don't want to offend anyone. So my answer may not be perfect, but I'll do my best. Here's what I've landed on. I am not Japanese or Asian, in case you couldn't tell. And so, I don't think it would be right for me to declare what is or isn't racist towards Japanese people, because our experiences are different from my own. So, if Japanese anime fans have come forward to say that they feel it's disrespectful to make Asian characters Black, then, in my opinion, I believe that I have to respect their viewpoints, and I will choose to listen to them. Because of that, in this video, I will not be painting any Black depictions of Japanese or Asian characters. But here is what I will say. If it's actually Asian people saying this, saying that they feel offended by making their characters Black, then I can respect that, and like I said, I will honor their wishes. But I also can't help but feel like that's not what's actually going on here. Because, and hey, I don't know about anyone else, but in my experience on the internet, whenever someone says something like, as a black person or as an Asian person, it's almost certainly a white guy. White people posing as minorities on the internet in order to win arguments is so common that it wouldn't surprise me at all if most of the people complaining about Blacktober being racist towards Asians aren't Asian at all, but are actually white people, pretending to be Asian. I also can't help but laugh at the doublespeak that I see people online use when talking about Japanese culture in relation to anime. For years, white people have defended anime sexism, pedophilia, and racist caricatures by saying that Japan just has different customs and that they just aren't as uptight as Americans. They've also defended whitewashing in fan art by using the exact same excuse, that Asian people just don't care about skin color. And so what would happen is, anytime black artists would try to speak out against whitewashing dark-skinned characters, we'd always wind up getting shut down with these excuses. And then of course, we'd get called neoliberal, woke skull feminazis or something. So it's just funny to me that Japan is somehow both an apolitical wonderland that doesn't care about race, and yet also simultaneously a marginalized culture that deeply cares about what skin color its characters are depicted as. But again, I will choose to take this argument in good faith and believe that it is genuinely Asian people themselves who are saying this. But for white anime fans who use this argument, the hypocrisy is not lost on me. It's not lost on me at all. But Blacktober isn't just about anime characters, and it never was. It also involves Western cartoons, video games, and TV characters. So this brings us to number 2. Blacktober is racist because blackwashing is just as bad as whitewashing. So this is probably the most common reason for why people hate on Blacktober, and it shares a lot of similarities with other arguments black people frequently encounter both online and in real life. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Blackwashing is just as bad as whitewashing. It's always white privilege this, white privilege that. Well, what about black privilege? You think chanting white power is racist? Well then how come black people get to chant black power? If you condemn white nationalism, then you also have to condemn black nationalism. Why do black people get to have a Black History Month? White people don't get a White History Month. Excuse me, how isn't Black Panther racist? You know they'd never let us make a White Panther. Do you recognize a pattern here? Something that these statements all have in common with each other? This is called both sidesism, and it's an extremely reductive way of approaching social politics. White people typically use both sidesism while complaining about what they deem to be hypocrisy and unfairness in regards to racial politics. It's usually for when they feel like black people are getting special treatment for something, hence the standard format of, if black people get to have this, then white people should have it too, or its inverse. If white people don't get to have this, then white people shouldn't either. People use both sidesism to justify why white people should be able to say the N-word, why black people shouldn't get affirmative action, that sort of thing. If this sounds childish, that's because it is. It's a gotcha argument that ignores all the structural and historical conditions that have led some groups to need certain protections that others simply don't. On the subject of whitewashing versus blackwashing, I really don't think I can do a better job of saying what hundreds of other black artists have already said over and over again, so I'm gonna quote an excellent black YouTuber named Thuman, who phrased it much more succinctly than I could ever hope to. In her own words, blackwashing is creating representation, whitewashing is erasing representation. I know that a lot of people are going to protest that assertion, but I ask that you just see this video through to the end before writing it off straight away. And, since we're on the subject anyway, let's finally take a moment to talk about representation. I feel like representation as a concept is one of the most misunderstood and hated phrases in identity politics. It's reached the same status that words like diversity and inclusion have, and that they've been uttered so many times by celebrities and brand executives that, at this point, they seem like nothing other than hollow buzzwords. But despite its negative reputation, I want us to take a step back and understand that representation does have meaning, and it's an important one. Black characters in entertainment and media are way more limited than white characters. They are often either stereotypes, tokens, or sidekicks, and the few times that they do get to have a prominent role, they are still often outshined and relegated to the background by white characters. And obviously, we should all know about the racist caricatures black people endured in the media during the 20th century. Content warning, I'm about to show some gross racist clips on screen. The very first Hollywood blockbuster was The Birth of a Nation, a deeply racist movie that demonized black people as being brutish, lazy, and sexually deviant. And some of our most beloved classic cartoons like Tom and Jerry and the Looney Tunes came from racist origins where they showed grotesquely racist images of black people. Early representation of black people on screen served the sole function of white entertainment and black subjugation, be it through minstrel shows, propaganda films, or racist children's cartoons. And although those kinds of outwardly racist depictions are a thing of the past, racism in film and TV really hasn't gone anywhere. Now we're still on the subject of representation, but this is going to segue us into argument number 3. Black people already have black characters. Let me ask you a question. How many black main characters in Western cartoons of the last 20 years can you name out loud? And when I say main character, I don't mean the best friend or the love interest or even the deuteragonist. I am asking you, how many instances of a black person as the main protagonist can you think of? I can name a few. First, definitely Craig from Craig of the Creek. Wonderfully wholesome show, can't recommend it enough. Obviously, Penny Proud from the Proud Family. If we're counting adult cartoons, we can add Cleveland Brown to that list. Let's see, there's Western anime like The Boondocks and Black Dynamite. There's superhero shows like Static Shock and Black Panther and Vixen. Oh, and there's a forgotten classic from the 2000s, Joe from Time Warp Trio. Shout out to Discovery Kids. Look, these shows are good, and in fact a lot of them are fantastic, but this list is pretty lacking all things considered, isn't it? Whenever a black person brings this argument up, the argument that there's still not enough representation for black people in television, we get countered by a lot of predictable rebuttals. First, people say, well, you're a minority. It makes sense that you don't have that many black main characters. You're not supposed to. And you can easily counter this by saying that yes, we are a minority. But as a minority, you would expect that the amount of representation for us on TV would be directly proportional to our population size, right? Well, let's do a couple quick calculations to test that theory. Black people make up about 14% of the American population. So, if things were perfectly aligned with that statistic, we should expect to see that we also make up about 14% of the main characters in Western cartoons, right? Hi guys, this is Editing Paya here. I'm coming through real quick to say that in hindsight, it was pretty wrong of me to conflate American population size with the entire rest of Western culture, because black demographics are very different across the Western population. So, after I'd already recorded and edited this script, I went ahead and tried to attempt to find a rough estimate for the black population size across the Western world by Googling individual Western regions' population sizes and then combining them all together. And it's very rough, and it's definitely not 100% accurate at all, because looking back, I think I forgot to include some European countries, but the percentage I came out with wound up being extremely close to 14% regardless. So I feel like doing this experiment based off of the 14% metric is still fair, but I shouldn't have assumed that being American automatically means that my demographic will perfectly match up with the rest of Western culture, because obviously America is not the center of the universe and other countries will have different demographics from my own. Alright, just had to give that quick addendum. Also, I'll just take this opportunity to remind you guys to like, share, and comment, since I forgot to say that in the rest of the video. Alright, please like, share, and comment, and subscribe. Alright, thank you very much. I listed 9 examples of black main animated TV characters in the last 20 years on television that I could think of. I'll be generous and bump that number up to 20, since I'm sure that there are some I've either forgotten to mention or just don't know about. Using IMDb, I was able to track down the total number of Western cartoons released in both the 2000s and the 2010s. Now for the record, both lists seem to have been created by just one user, so there's a decent chance that they aren't 100% perfect or accurate. But using the list, I was able to find even the most obscure cartoons that I've never heard anyone else talk about, leading me to believe that it should be fairly thorough and reliable. After tallying up both the 2000s and the 2010s, the total number of Western cartoons released so far in the 21st century is around 1,262 shows. So, let's take our number, 20 cartoons with black main protagonists, and divide it by the total number of cartoons in the last 2 decades and see what we get. %. We are 14% of the country's population, and yet we make up 1% of black main protagonists in Western cartoons. And by the way, yes, this also applies to other minorities as well. Asian people, Hispanic people, Indigenous people, all racial minorities face the exact same issues with the lack of representation in art and television. I don't think it's my place to do so, but I invite any other person of color watching this video to repeat this experiment with whatever your own race is. Tally up the numbers, see what you get, and comment the percentage down below. You'll probably be just as disappointed as I was. So why does this matter? Why is this something that we need to care about? Having black main characters matters because it's important for black children to be able to see themselves as the main character. Visualizing yourself as a main character helps you to feel important and necessary and impactful, and black kids deserve to feel like they're centered. They deserve to feel like their stories and identities matter. Constantly being relegated to the role of the side character only serves to reinforce the suspicion that many black kids deep down already have, that their lives aren't relevant or important or worth caring about. This is the reason why so many black mothers go out of their way to make sure that their daughters have black dolls to play with, to teach them that black girls are valuable and that they're worth prioritizing. Because the negative effects of a young black girl not feeling valuable, of not feeling worthy, wound rippling through the rest of her life and creating a cascade of problems with self-love, self-esteem, and self-confidence. Trust me, I would know. But let's take a second to talk about these great black characters that white people love to say that we have, because even though I love a lot of these characters myself, I still recognize that most of them are way more one-dimensional and repetitive than their white counterparts. Like, have you ever noticed that black characters in TV shows constantly fall into the best friend category, where their main purpose is to support the white main character without driving the story forward on their own? How they rarely ever get episodes devoted to their struggles, and how the few times that they do, it's usually a comic relief episode or a one-off that never winds up being relevant down the line? Have you ever noticed how most black female characters in cartoons have the exact same personality as each other? How most of them are typically strong, confident women who have no major character traits outside of being hardworking, capable, and maybe a little sassy? Have you ever noticed that despite being so strong, so capable, and so good-natured, that most of these characters never get to be the main protagonist? Or how often many of them have leadership skills that wind up getting sidetracked by the white main character who's not nearly as competent as they are? And have you ever noticed how most of the time, black characters who are part of an ensemble cast are typically the least favorite and least talked about characters of the fandom? How their skills and attributes are often sidetracked by white characters? How these black characters are usually the least developed and least cared for characters of their shows, so much so that people regularly forget that they exist? Look, I love these characters, and most black people love these characters, but compared to the wide, diverse range of characters that white people have in both main and side characters, it's basically nothing in comparison. And this brings us to point number 4, make your own black characters. But first, a word from our sponsors. Hi guys, this is going to be a quick 30-second Patreon plug. You can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, but pledging $3 will give you behind-the-scenes content, and pledging $5 will get you access to monthly Q&A live streams, the first of which will be held on October 30th, the end of this month. If you'd like a portrait commission, you can subscribe to the higher tiers of my Patreon, or you can DM me on any of my social media platforms at @ArtofPaya. Patrons are helping me to pay off my medical bills, get new video equipment, buy necessities, that sort of thing. Thanks so much for the support, and now back to the video. Number 4, make your own black characters. This is probably the most frustrating and arrogant point out of all of them, because we do. Black artists do make their own stories, and we do make our own characters. We've done this for years. Every black artist that I know has their own webcomic or their own OCs, or they constantly create black portraits. And every black writer I know tells black stories, whether it's historical fiction or Afrofuturism or black romance. Blacktober art and original black art are not mutually exclusive. They can and do coexist with each other, because every Blacktober artist that I've seen also regularly makes their own original artwork. So the arrogance and the audacity of telling black artists to just make black art is so overwhelming that the first time I saw someone say it, I had to step away from Twitter for weeks. But I want to add another point to the mix. If you spend any amount of time on Black Twitter, you'd see the vocal desire to have fewer black stories about racism or oppression and more about, actual fun stuff. Like, where are the black fantasy stories, the black action shows, the Afrofuturism? There are lots of excellent black fantasy and sci-fi authors who have been putting in work for decades in the book field, but when it comes to film and television, our scope is much more limited. Probably the most popular example of Afrofuturism in modern film is, of course, Marvel's Black Panther. And don't get me wrong, Black Panther was incredible, and it still is. But even though it's amazing, and even though every black person loves it, it's still very much a movie about race. The entire story of Wakanda is that they had to hide themselves from the world in order to protect themselves against white colonization, and the movie's plot revolves around that decision, whether Wakanda should remain in hiding or risk becoming vulnerable by giving resources to the rest of the black population that they kind of abandoned. That is an extremely heavy, extremely political plot. Is it amazing? Of course it is. But it's also more of what black people already have in spades, hyper-political content that revolves around our oppression. If your response to that is, well, why not just make more black fantasy and sci-fi? Then, like I said, we do. Black artists are always creating their own webcomics and fantasy stories starring black people, but most of these artists are small, independent creators. Trying to create public black art that's given funding by agencies and film executives is extremely difficult to do if your show doesn't involve any of the usual oppression or brutality that, let's be honest, most modern black TV and movies typically have.
The show is called Black Time.
Black Time, okay, look.
Yeah, it's about a group of friends, black of course, traveling through time. They find a time machine and go on all sorts of adventures, including robots, dinosaurs, aliens,
slaves, right?
Did I say slaves?
Black artists have black art, but the majority of the art that we have is relegated within the realms of political, racially conscious storytelling, which is exhausting to have to constantly consume. And now we finally arrive at number 5. Race-bending characters is bad representation. That argument usually goes something along the lines of this. Paya, why would you want race-bent characters? Race-bending is forced, it's shallow and contrived. It's something liberals do when they want to seem woke and progressive. Wouldn't you rather have your own brand new characters? Wouldn't you rather have real, genuine representation? Let's talk about this for a second, because, to be honest, this is an argument that I've heard from both white people and black people. If you've been on Twitter these past couple of weeks, you might have heard the news that Lashana Lynch, the British actress famous for her role in Queen and Slim, will soon be starring as the first black female James Bond in the 25th Bond film. This has sparked a lot of conversation on black Twitter, and so far, most of the reception has been pretty negative. Among a lot of black people, there's this perception that race-bending, specifically blackwashing, is like getting second scraps. They see it like getting hand-me-down clothes from your older brother instead of your own fresh pair, or like eating leftovers off of someone else's plate instead of getting your own plate of warm food. A lot of black people are actually insulted by the idea, and wind up criticizing modern-day examples of it like Hamilton and, well, the Black James Bond. But here is my counter-argument. Black examples of race-bending are not new. They've been happening for decades, and a lot of them are from stories that we all universally love and adore. For example, the most famous example of race-bending in history is probably 1975's The Wiz, the all-black adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. The Wiz is basically every black kid's first introduction to stage performance, because, if you went to a black school with a theater department, you've probably performed The Wiz at least once. There's also HBO's animated series Happily Ever After, a show that took common fairy tales and adapted them to other cultures, most notably African and Caribbean ones. And then, of course, there's none other than Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, starring Brandy and Whitney Houston. This movie is a cherished memory for every black girl of the 90s and early 2000s, myself included. I remember I'd watch it every time I went to my grandma's house, and it would fill me with the kind of wonder and magic that I couldn't even put words to. These are all examples of white characters and white stories being turned into black characters and black stories, and all of them serve one primary purpose in mind: the purpose of teaching black kids that they belong. During the James Bond controversy, I came across a tweet that said, "I don't need traditionally white characters recast with black characters. What kind of self-esteem issues y'all got? What does that do for you?" And to me, this encapsulates where so much of the discourse stems from. There is a belief that wanting black characters to take on white roles is needy, that it's aspiring for whiteness instead of standing proudly in your blackness, that it's begging to be included by white America instead of accepting your own heritage. And this expands to the broader belief that any desire a black person might have to be accepted and to be a part of mainstream culture is somehow weak or insecure, that wanting to belong instead of accepting that you don't belong is a betrayal of your own culture. And look, I understand where this mindset comes from. Contrary to what it might seem like I've been arguing throughout this video, I do want original black stories, and I would rather see original black characters instead of race-mixed ones. But even though I feel that way, I also recognize the power and the impact of showing something like Brandy's Cinderella to a young black child. Because when a little black girl looks on TV and sees a black Cinderella, she learns that she can be Cinderella. She learns that she can be one of the most cherished and beloved characters in all of animation, a character that embodies one of the oldest and most influential fairy tales of all time. She learns that she can see herself reflected in the culture of America, and she learns that she does belong. Black people can, should, and do create our own stories. But the thing about characters like Cinderella and Dorothy and Superman and James Bond is that these characters are cultural icons. They are pillars and landmarks of not just American culture, but of global culture across the world. Every child dreams about being Spider-Man or Superman or Princess Elsa, but only non-white children get shut down and told that they can't be them. And the power of having a black Ariel or a black Cinderella is that it gives black children the power to push back and say, no, I can be this. Here's the proof that I can be this. And of course, the black characters that we have are wonderful and iconic, and I'm not denying that. Black kids love Black Panther, and they love Miles Morales, and I'm thrilled that these characters exist, and I want us to continue making characters like them. But sometimes, a black kid doesn't want to have to be the Black Spider-Man. Sometimes he wants to be the Spider-Man, the one that we all know and grew up with. And you can call it low self-esteem, you can call it insecure, but I wouldn't call it any of those things. I would call it human nature. The human desire to feel important and impactful and to feel like you matter. And this swings everything back to Blacktober, after Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Tony McDade and countless other innocent Black lives were stolen by police, and after months of dangerous, terrifying protests against these murders, the Black art community wanted to gift itself something fun and kind and peaceful to ease our burdens. We wanted to do something to show us that our lives matter, after a year of our country treating us like they don't. A moment ago, I mentioned The Wiz as a prominent example of racebending during the 70s. I first saw the movie version of The Wiz when I was a little girl, but I would eventually go on to perform the theater version in high school. Can you guess which character I played? Just kidding. I've always had way too much stage fright to ever do any acting or singing or anything like that. No, I was not a performer on stage, I was a musician in the orchestra pit. I played the alto sax. The fun thing about being a saxophone in an orchestra pit is that you typically don't have to play all that much. The rhythm section has to play non-stop throughout the whole thing, the horns usually have notes in every song, even if it's just for a few measures, but for saxophones, depending on the musical, there are oftentimes whole songs in which you don't even play a single note, since your role is usually just to add harmony or to flare things up with a spicy jazz solo. And this means that during these precious moments, you get to sit back and watch the show out of the corner of your eye. Sneakily, of course, cause if the conductor catches you, then you'll get whacked on the head. So, during my school's production of The Wiz, every night I would basically get a free first row seat to watch it, and my favorite part was always the closing number, Home. Throughout The Wiz, Dorothy regularly sings about her fear and uncertainty, and about how much she desires to return home. And Home, the finale, is Dorothy's final song, where she swells with her desperation to return home to her family and to once again feel a sense of warmth and familiarity. But as the song progresses, she finds strength in the new experiences that she's had and the way that she's grown and developed as a person. She considers the friends that she's made and the battles she's fought, and she learns that, despite all her fear, she has come to love and appreciate Oz for what it's given her. One of the closing lines of the song reads, "Living here in this brand new world might be a fantasy, but it's taught me to love, so it's real to me." These Black versions of characters become real to us. Brandy's Cinderella became real to me as a little girl, and she's now the first image my mind thinks of when I hear the name Cinderella. Just like how the Black fairy tales from Happily Ever After became real to me, and just like how the Black Dorothy, while fighting back tears in the musical's finale, became forever real to me. Blacktober is about taking characters that Black people have valued and cherished, characters that have been a part of our lives since childhood, and finding a home in them. A home that was often denied to us by people who tell us that we could never be James Bond, or that we could never be Spider-Man, or that we could never truly belong. I'm sure that a lot of people, if they haven't already clicked off this video yet, are still gonna come away from this not liking Blacktober or thinking it's bad, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, I can't control your opinion, and you're free to feel however you feel. But I do hope that, at the very least, you've come away from this video with a new perspective and an understanding that you might not have had before. Thanks so much for watching, and keep doing your best.